Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here again. So I have some goals. I think we got through some of them enough. This is a really free-form lesson plan, shall I say, in the sense that I really want this to meet your needs. And so we're going to get started. I'm going to walk through kind of what I was thinking of talking about this morning. But the last session we spent a lot more time on close reading, which was very valuable, I think, for the people who did it. So we will go forward and monitor and adjust as we need. So the first thing we're going to do this morning is we're really going to talk about what are the reading skills that the students have right now. So if we were to say to your students, when you're given something to read, how do you attack that? What is your game plan to attack that reading? And we're going to talk about some ways you can reinforce those skills and really make them more mindful of it. And I know Teresa uses the word metacognitive, thinking about your own thinking. And we want to know that kids can articulate how they go about attacking reading. And so that's a really critical part of close reading. Then we're going to use some techniques to scaffold close reading. So we're going to go through a lesson from beginning to end on close reading. And I know you had one a few minutes ago, so the last group, that took a long time, which is okay. But if after the last lesson you kind of picked up some more confidence and competence, then we won't need to take that much. We're going to talk about increasing rigor in text and in questioning. That one of the challenges we have is we don't necessarily know what are the right questions to ask the kids. And a lot of times we end up asking very simplistic questions instead of kind of the abstract questions that the Common Core demands of us. Then we're going to just talk about short cycle assessment. And not something really formal, but something very informal. How we can, as classroom teachers, on a very regular basis, be inventorying whether our kids are mastering this close reading stuff or not. Then we're going to talk about how and this will just happen organically. What can we do to make you more comfortable with close reading? What can we do to make your kids more comfortable and more skilled in close reading? And then we'll talk about how to select a close reading passage. And if we get through half of that, it'll be great. So I wanted to start by having you talk to your partner. If I was to go to any of your classrooms and say to them, as a reader, if I gave you something, a little sheet of paper with a story on it to read, how would you attack that? How do you read? What are the skills that you have to read something well? What's your game plan to go about accessing and understanding this thing? So, talk to your partners and see what you would think kids might say. Talk to your partner. Talk to an elder partner or three of you. Talk about what you think your kids might say.
They might not even know. So do they read it first? Before they read it, they look at it and they know to enter the paragraphs. They remember the paragraphs.
I'm such an owl reader.
Start with the decoding. But I very rarely give them
But I think someone would know annotate, right?
It's hard to teach annotation because it's just so right on what you could do. I like numbering
And a very specific question when you're reading to look for.
Yeah. Jokes.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And the microphone.
You know, and that's, you know, that's one of
It's
the
easier for me to ask
skills
them.
that I teach kids that because I can't find what they're saying. Every time they come on,
Connotations.
and that way, because it's the same thing, you know, there's those actual. Some of them are 50, some of them are 50.
There's a place here where I can go and blow it up. I've walked in, I've even seen them.
Okay, so now what we want to do is we're going to have each little group or table kind of contribute. So how do good readers attack unseen text? So we gave all your students a passage on a sheet of paper. What would they tell us they're going to do to go after and read this and learn from it? So we'll start here. What did you guys kind of brainstorm about?
Well, maybe like, first thing you need to do is find out the central idea of the article. What words don't you understand? Kind of similar to what's going on in closed reading. Is there a theme or message? Make sure you're annotating consistently on stuff that is tied to the main idea.
In your room, does everybody annotate the same way?
In my room they do, yeah.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
What did you guys, how would you enhance that? Did you have any other things that you do with your students?
I just mentioned I do a cold read usually the first time. Read
So
it
you do
on-
like a first read?
Yeah, I let them read it, try it, struggle through it on the run, and then I go back and get a second read with it.
So the first read is students. So if you were taken out of the equation, what would you tell them the second read is?
If I was taken
Out of
out,
the equation. In other words, I'm giving them this piece of reading, and it's a test for like, you're not going to read it. So the first read, they kind of read through for like the gist kind of a thing. What would be their second read?
well, if it was a test, then they would go through and they would annotate for the first one. I'm assuming in that situation that I'm going to be able to go through a second read with them.
Okay, no, so let's assume that's off the table. Tell me about, would I just annotate any old thing the
Oh,
first
no,
time,
no,
second
no, no.
time?
I go back a lot to the central idea. If you're going to underline or annotate something, it needs to be connected to something, or it just gets random.
Okay, so the first time I read, what do I do?
The first time you read where it says Matt there finds central idea.
Okay, so the first time I read, I find the central idea. And what tactic do I use to identify this central idea?
You know, I don't know, they read the first, they read the beginning paragraph, or the ending paragraph, they try to come up maybe in one sentence a summary of what they think the article is about.
Okay.
Such as right now-
Well, what do I do in second read?
Well, right now, such as that right there, right now when we go through and we're reading argumentative test,
Mhm.
and so your central idea is you find the proposition
Mhm.
of the article, and the second read would be going and finding the evidence to support the proposition of the article.
So what I'm hearing is the second read might be purpose-driven,
Yeah.
depending on now whether we're reading literature or an argument or a persuasive essay or an essay to inform something. So purpose-driven. Would there be a third read?
There could be. If I make the determination they still don't get it, there may very well be a third read.
Okay. So if I'm on my own, you're out of the equation, but what do I do for my third read?
And they're taking a test with this, they can't talk to each other?
Right.
Probably some sort of summarization of it.
So what I'm trying to drive here is, we've been doing a lot of stuff on close reading, really important. But we've been handling close reading as, I'm a good close reading teacher. The goal is not to make you great close reading teachers. The goal is to make kids effective, independent readers. So the question of the day here is, how do we now scaffold kids, transition kids, so that when you're no longer in the picture, they have a mental model of how they attack unseen text. So what's that? So back here at this table, what'd you guys talk about? What would you add, subtract? What would you do? What were things your students would do? Yeah.
Well, I always teach them to preview the text. So once they establish that purpose, whatever that, why are they reading the text in the first place? What's their goal?
So the first thing is you would have them set a goal,
No, set the purpose.
set purpose.
Whatever the purpose for reading.
So I'm taking a test, you're not there.
Yep.
How do I know what my purpose for my first read is?
Well, you have to read the prompt. You have to read whatever's given, the test.
So in other words, if the first question is what's the meaning of the word catastrophe in line 7, the purpose for reading is to find the definition of catastrophe in line 7?
Then you would have to go to that line. That would be a text-dependent question.
Okay.
However, I was thinking you were talking about an entire story.
I'm thinking of the whole thing. See, I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm playing the whole thing.
Your purpose, yeah, so if your purpose is what's the meaning of this word in line 7, then you do that and you're done.
Mhm. So the next question says, why did the author use real-world examples in paragraph 8?
Then you have to read the entire text.
So at
Because
some
you
point,
can't just go to paragraph 8.
okay, so the first time I read, do I read the whole thing?
Yes.
And then do I then become question specific the second time I read? Or do I read the whole thing?
Well, I think before you even read, you have to preview the text. I think you can
I don't
gather
understand. Tell me about that.
I think you have to, because there's titles, there's subtitles, there's captions, there's pictures, there's information within a text that is given before you even start.
Well, identifying the text structure, because you're going to read different texts based on what type of structure it is too. So I think identifying what type of structure it is, so then they know how they're going to go through and tackle it.
So what you're saying is the first read in your rooms sometimes is that before I even begin, I'm not even really reading all the content. I'm stepping back a little bit and I'm going, oh, there's a picture, there's a question, the title is a question, so the title might be part of what I look at here. There might be a series of text breaks where there's questions, or there might be something in a column. I would be looking at all that stuff.
So essentially, it's like when you get an invitation to a party.
Mhm.
The invitation sets the purpose. Then once you know the purpose, you read the fine print that says you need to wear formal attire.
Yeah.
So then when you walk into that party, you have a better idea of what you're going to be experiencing. So
In
you
your
have to-
class, what's the second read going to be? First read is that sort of gist of this, kind of that big picture. Not even really reading all the text, but reading all the clues. What's the second read?
is reading for the central idea.
Read for central idea. And what tactics do I do to do that? What's my tactic?
The tactic is to, when you see words or phrases that address the purpose or the question or the reason why you're reading it, you're underlining, you're writing a note to yourself in the
What if there are no
margin.
questions? Right now, just assume there's no questions. And I understand this. Next thing I have to do is to find the main idea. What are tactics that I can use as a good reader to find the main idea?
Summarize the paragraphs after you read it.
So the second time I read, when I read for a central idea, you're thinking that good readers, when reading the second time, looking for the central idea, read each paragraph and mentally kind of summarize the gist of each one. So it's maybe looking for gist.
Well, looking for understanding.
Of
And
content.
asking questions along the way when you don't understand, making connections to yourself, making connections to what you learned prior, making connections to just trying to make sense. That would be
So do you think, if I ask all your students what I'm asking you, would they answer the same way you are?
They would answer, but probably not exactly the same.
And so all of them do this. I'm being the devil's advocate here, guys. I'm really pressing you guys, because here's what I think happens to all of us, is we think kids have tactics, and they don't have tactics. They don't have tactics.
Well, so,
Because to me, when you tell me I just read and find the central idea,
yeah.
I think there's some real tactical things I do to find the central idea.
So the devil's advocate would be, that's what I do in the class, is I walk around as they're reading, and then when I see good things,
Mm-hmm.
I take that student's paper, and then I put it on the doc.
So what
cam.
good thing did you
Here's
see? Tell me a good thing you would have seen.
the things that I was saying. The things like, I give them a question, I give them some reason for reading, I don't just say read it.
So now we're back to purpose-driven reading.
Right.
Good readers are purpose-driven. Now you said that the purpose of this particular read is central idea. So you're walking around looking over everybody's shoulder. How do you know, by what you see, who is picking up the central idea?
Well, I taught them by saying they do the first read, they, like what Kevin said, they write like a little phrase at the bottom, this is what they think the overall meaning of the text is, and then they chunk. They do their second read, they
So
chunk.
tell me about chunk. Tell me about chunk.
They look for pattern, they look for small ideas, kind of like our history book has like a chapter, and then within the chapter there's red titles, which are basically like body paragraphs of an essay. And then within each body paragraph, there's concrete details. And so I would teach them to do the same thing in their read. Look for pattern, look for chunking of information, look for transition words that help, that give them clues or cues that they're moving to a new idea. And so then they basically look at it like a puzzle. And they take that whole article and then they chunk it into smaller parts. And then, so I'm looking for a line. I'm
there we
looking
go.
for number one, and they circle it and then they write the main idea of chunk one. And then I'm looking for, you know, like I would have already read the article. And so let's say I think that there are 4 chunks or 4 small ideas that make up this big central idea. So I'm looking for 4 things.
So what I'm hearing you say is, in fact, what you think the kids do is, when they read it for the second time, or the third time, whatever we're on, I'm looking for sentences that cue to bigger ideas, followed by supporting detail. And so if I was walking around the room, I might see an underlined sentence. It's often the first sentence, but it's not always the first sentence. It's underlined, underlined, and then maybe some check marks off to the right that show where are the details for that idea. Could kids articulate it the way I just did? Okay, so this is what I want to challenge you to begin to think about. See, we talk in the abstract. 8th graders think in the very concrete. There's no right answer here, but we've got to move so that we have a tactic that is pretty concrete for readers who are not very sophisticated, who are now using really complex text. So we're gonna move, and thank you for letting me interrogate you so viciously. Because we have our adult line going, and we do things that we've done so many years, it's like driving a car. If I had to teach someone tomorrow how to drive a car, there are so many nuanced little things I do when I drive a car, I wouldn't even think to say them. And the person would wrap the car around the tree or put it in reverse and hit the garage door. Because I wouldn't say open the garage door open, I'd just say put it in reverse. And I think, well, anybody knows you open the garage door first. So it's that same thing. We have got to work. The whole point of close reading is that we are working to give kids tactics so that when they go after a passage, they have embraced what we were modeling and now they own it. Thoughts?
We were saying when you first had us talk that you have to, if you just say annotate and don't give any direction, then it's hard to hold them accountable, and there's a lot of different things that they could do that wouldn't necessarily be wrong. And so the first thing that you have to do is give them a purpose by asking a good question. So you need tactics to answer a question. And in an academic setting, they're always reading to answer a question, right? And I think something like what's the central idea is almost too vague. You can ask a more specific question that gets them to answer the central idea. Like, is George a good friend and a medicine man?
So there's sort of a prompt. There's a prompt that
Needs to be a
sets
prompt.
purpose for the reading.
And then you add, okay, what's your evidence for showing that
Right.
X?
So,
And you can
what
circulate
I'm
it.
hearing you say that's very important is that in close reading, every time we read, it's purpose driven.
Yes.
Do all of our kids know that? See, so that's one of the things we have to be very explicit is every time you read, it is for a purpose.
Right.
And I'm going to agree with you and disagree with you because in a minute, we're going to do exactly what both of you talked about. We're going to give you questions that definitely drive the purpose of the reading because that's what we will be doing.
Right.
But I also wanted to tell you that think about why are we worried so fervently in the real world these days about close reading? Because the kind of reading adults do in college and careers is all about short passages, short essential passages with lots of meaning, lots of import. And we have to have people be able to read that without a question. When I get a letter from the IRS that says, Ginny, you're in deep trouble and you're going to be audited, please call 1-800-SCAM-ARTIST and we will help get you out of there. I have to be able to read that closely. It does not come with questions.
You would eventually, you create your own questions.
Bingo.
When you get that letter from the IRS, you have, why am I reading it? That, all of those
Bingo.
things.
So now, would our kids say, if you handed me this sheet of paper, no questions,
I remember,
this is how I am going after it. And what would we have? See, close reading right now is what teachers do to model for kids their reading. Close reading is really how all good readers attack complex passages. So I want us to start thinking about taking ourselves out of the equation. What would be the steps that 7th grade kids at Clark would say when somebody hands me an essay? This is step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3. Many times, so for example, all of you have said it's important that they know the questions. So is step 1 this? Is step 1 if questions are present, before I even look at this, I'm on this side of the screen scanning the questions to give me a sense of my purpose for reading. Or is step 1, I look at the first question, think, okay, so when I read it this time, I'm going to read it to answer that question. Or is there a prior reading where I just do the gist and the words? Do I ground myself before I attack the questions? There's no right answer. We all do it different. But we have to begin to have that overt conversation with the kids. Because close reading so much for all the Valley teachers I'm working with is so much about me being comfortable as the teacher that I'm not remembering. The real point of close reading has nothing to do with whether I do it well. The real point of close reading is 6 months from now, 2 years from now, when your kids are freshmen at Clovis High, can the Clovis High teacher hand them something and they can read it? And do they have tactics to read it? Other thoughts that came out here about good readers do.
The RSP, so we were saying our kids, I don't think they have a clue, they could not articulate that very, very well. And what they did say, I think would be very surface level answers, just what they think we want to hear, what they think, I should circle the words I don't know, or, all those little things like that.
But that's not a bad tactic if we've helped them to. So we know that there are many kids who are poor readers. They may or may not be an RSP, they're not very good readers.
Yeah.
They need tactics, and they need them explicit, because if it's sort of like, we'll read it for a purpose, but they need to know what the purpose is, that, to get kids who have the background, and many of the kids you serve, a lot of the kids here at Clark, you don't really have a lot of EL kids, but you have a lot of kids who are out of poverty. So they were just not exposed to a lot of stuff. And the story we're gonna read in a few minutes will really bring that out. So then they need tactics, because they don't have someone in their home every night who's picking up the newspaper or watching television and turning to them and saying, why do you think the author did that? They're just not doing that. And so when we're asking these questions, it's like oblivion to them. So what we want to think about is what would be the tactics for our kids. Over here, what'd you guys talk about?
Go ahead, Sharon. So I work with RSP kids.
Okay.
The first thing they would know to do if they got a piece of text would be to number the paragraphs. And then scan the text for unfamiliar words.
Linda's non.
Linda, what did you think?
Non-verbal.
She's struggling verbally. Yeah.
Yeah.
My kids would look at all the text features.
Because that's kind of up here.
Yeah.
Anything that we haven't talked about? So the second handout that I gave you is a little set of bookmarks. They're not the right bookmarks, they're just a set. But I think it's not a bad idea for you as a grade level or as a class, for your class. What would this list look like in your class? What do I do to be a mindful reader, to be aware and a good reader? Would it say, I'm going to set a purpose for reading, which is what we talked here about? Would it say, I slow down? Would it say, the first time I read, I look for this. The second time I read, I look for that. And when we think about close reading, that's really what close reading begins to say. There's a generic way to attack something I've never seen. So what's the first thing we do? The first thing we do is we don't even read anything. We look for pictures, bold print, the title. We look at clues that are going to spark us to go, oh, I bet that's about football, or I bet that's about shopping. I bet that's about the history of America. Then what do we do the second time? The second time, almost all of you are saying one of two things, vocabulary or main idea. Two very common approaches. There's no right or wrong answer here. It really is what your kids and you as a class say, this is going to be the tactics we're going to use. Ultimately, when you were in college and you got a college textbook, you made your own way of attacking that book. You got a book and you scribbled all over it, you wrote in the margins, you highlighted things. I know that when I was in classes I was not good at, I would practically color the whole book yellow because I wasn't good at discerning what was important or not. I took a psychology class and I think I painted the book yellow. But when I was in a topic that I was really good at, that I knew that was important, that wasn't important, that was important, that wasn't important. So that's something you learn. But if I did it one way and Teresa did it another way, it doesn't mean hers was right or wrong, because ultimately all of us do this the way it works for us. And if it works for us, it's the right way. But when you're dealing with junior high kids and 7th grade kids, it helps to begin to give them some way to do it. Because ultimately, you're never going to grade them on how they did it. You're going to grade them that they got the right context or answer. But it really is helpful for 7th grade kids to have almost a formulaic view of it. So if the first time I read, I'm not even reading the passage, I'm looking at the title, text information, and pictures. The second time I read, sometimes people say, I like to read for unfamiliar words, circle unfamiliar words. I'll give you a plus delta. For me, this is Ginny. This is not universally research-based. For me, looking at unfamiliar words can sometimes be distracting for my second reading, because I could have the following words: terrifying, sacrifice, and vegetarian, and I don't know those 3 words. Here's the essay. Jenny got a new puppy. The poor little puppy stood at the top of the stairs, and it was terrifying for him to look down and realize he couldn't get to the bottom of the stairs. He was playful, and after he played for 2 or 3 hours, he'd get very hungry. It was very obvious he was not a vegetarian because he just loved to chomp down any meat that fell on the floor. See, those words that I picked had nothing to do with what the story was about. So what I like to tell people to do on the second read, what I do on the second read, I look for high frequency words. Puppy, 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 puppy. New, 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 new. Small, 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 small. You know, terrifying, terrifying, you know. And then I begin, because so sometimes I find to go right to the words I don't know is not as helpful to me as to go to the words that show up a lot, because for me, they begin to clue in that main idea. Then my third reading, I underline, I typically look for those high-value sentences that are main idea sentences. So I love, several of you said, first and last paragraph. And if I'm in nonfiction, I learned this a long time ago. If I'm in nonfiction, I read the first paragraph, the first sentence, and every paragraph of the last paragraph. That's all I'm reading with that one. Because that'll give you a lot of the gist of the story. If I'm in literature, it doesn't work that way. It's usually, you know, it's configured so different. But boy, the minute I go, one of you said text structure, the minute I see it's nonfiction, I'll read the first paragraph, the first sentence in each paragraph, and the last paragraph. It really gives me a sense. And then I'll go to the questions, and I'll begin figuring out the questions. There is no right answer. But as you do close reading with your kids, I want you to be mindful of a couple things. Number one, begin to show them a routine. Because if it just feels to them like these questions are being shot out of a gun, and I just have to wait for a question to know how to read, then I don't ever get my own head wrapped around the tactic to read. And secondly, work as a class, and maybe even some days at grade level, but it really doesn't have to be at grade level. Work to have, this is how we do it in my class. In our class, this is how we do it. And work with the kids. What are we going to do on our first read? What are we going to do on our second read? What are we going to do on our third read? What are we going to do with the questions? Because 7th grade students have no tactics. Everyone in this room is scholarly and experienced. You've read thousands and thousands of sheets of paper. The kids that are sitting in your room, if we're lucky, have read hundreds of sheets of paper. And some of them less than 100 sheets of paper. You know, when you really think about dense text. And so the first thing I want to leave you with, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk about it, is how can we work this second semester so that from tomorrow to the day there's a state test, we have evolved a little set of, in my classroom, this is what we do as mindful readers. So I'm in control of reading. I know how to start the task. Talk at your table about that. Is that a good thing, a bad thing, something you want to do, and where might you take that?
Strategy or talent.
What are your thoughts?
It's still going to be pretty similar. I mean, we're going to the same ideas.
So you need one of those. Yeah, right. And then talk about the three main real objectives: to inform, to persuade, to entertain.
Yeah, they look at science.
Literature, you know what I mean? I think shrunk it down to be that like the basis that everybody did when they started. Which I
think it's, and there's no right answer. There's no right answer, but you've got to have some tactic. Because most kids, and I always think about the state test when I'm thinking about them. And I think of me as a test taker.
What this is
Tell
about.
a story about trees, then you get a story about the icebergs in Africa, then you get a story about the Indian maiden. I mean, they don't make sense.
You know what I mean?
They're just random. Exactly. And they're soup to nuts passages. It's not like, well, it's this or this. And so I have to have in my head the tactic. So for you, it's almost like a flow chart. Is it this, then I go down this way, is it that? And for some people, that works, for some people, that. But if it works for you and your kids, then that's how you always explain it. It's gonna be high value.
I like the part where, you know, you use your mind to when you're reading something.
I think you're finding out first.
Oh, yeah.
If you're reading that, then they automatically think it's important.
But sometimes what I've learned is you have to sort of define that purpose more clearly. So the first time I read, here's the
And then
purpose.
beyond that,
Second time,
no,
here's
instead
the
of trying to
The
find
third
like,
time I read a question, that becomes the fourth time, read the next question, that becomes.
Yeah, you want to be around.
Yes.
Then I say, don't talk about
I read them all together, and I can finish it. And then you look at the question, oh, okay, there's a question, now you go back. And you know what I mean, because it didn't have a purpose. Maybe, just you want to really, like, well, like the complex, heavy content, heavy vocabulary, you know? Yeah. Pressure out. I don't
I was gonna say, some of the words in the text, like, well, that's easy bonus.
Yeah. No, I mean, yes, the tone.
Give them that little, hey, you guys read through
Because if
this
you just say
and have that
that,
conversation.
like you
Groups
said,
of four
you just
or
read it.
whatever. I'm thinking for
So what I was gonna do the next, so first of all, do you see some value in this? Yeah, and so I think what I would suggest is, I think the worst thing you could probably do is all sit down right now as adults and make the list and tell your kids that's what their list is. I think the best thing you can do is start working with where your kids are and where you are at with your kids. Because we end up getting into a fight about who's got the right list, and I don't want Jenny's list because I like Teresa's list, and because that's not what's important. What's important is that we have kids embrace a strategy, a procedure that makes sense to them. And so a really good goal over the next 2 or 3 weeks might be to begin to work with your kids and say, let's talk about purpose-driven reading. What do we do the first time we read? What do we do the second time we read? What do we do the third time? And over time, maybe by February 1st, we're down to making something that looks like a bookmark that can guide us through up till the state test. So if I'm looking at that bookmark for a couple months, maybe by the time I hit April, I'll actually embrace some of it. So when I get to the state test and there is no bookmark, I'll remember, oh yeah, that's the first thing I do, that's the second thing I do. Because most kids are coming to the state test with no schema, no mental model. So they read the story, and then they read the question, and they try to unravel the question in the story one way or another. And these kinds of tactics will really help them do better. And obviously, we want kids to do well on the test, but more importantly, we want kids to focus high school and be able to read and access the text in their classes. And so that's really what we're after. So this is a routine that I'm going to kind of model through with you guys today. And it comes out of a little book at the end of it. If you like the process, there's some little wiggle room money in the BCII grant that I would just buy this book for everybody and send it to great if you like it. If you don't like it, I'm not trying to make you do it. The 8th grade wanted us to buy the book. So this is sort of a little, this is one author's routine about how to access text. So we have a story here. And as I'm passing this out, if you will look at the bold text and the pictures. You look at the pictures and the bold text. See how many more I need.
We need like 3 more.
Pardon? I'm okay. I'm moving around. I don't know if it's cold or warm, so I'm moving.
You're good, you're good.
Okay, so just very quickly, the first step that this author talks about is, he says, you should preview the text. Help students learn to identify clues about the meaning, purpose, or goal of the text. They can first read the title, guiding questions. In literary text, students can scan for characters' names and clues about setting and time. In informational text, students can use features like paragraph subheadings, photos, illustrations to get a sense of the organization and purpose. So it seems like there's a first read that even sits above finding the main idea. It's just sort of a gist. It's sort of, gee, I'm just kind of getting grounded. So with this, don't read it. Read the title, look at the picture, and read the question under the title, and talk at your table what you think this is about.
Yes or no? That you can modify an object.
Genetically modified.
Yes or no?
Yeah, it's like a teaching, like if you're teaching a question.
Either the author illuminates
My instinct is
or
to
maybe
to be more resistant to pests and to grow faster.
Okay, so first of all, if it was just the title, if it was just GMO, yes or no, we would have to hope that you knew what a GMO is. Does anybody just know what a GMO is? Because they're brilliant and smart.
Genetically modified.
Yeah, so some of us have heard this in the lingo about genetically modified something. But you can imagine the average 8th grader just looking at that title. If it's a GMO, yes or no.
So you figured that you wouldn't have to know GMO. What you would have to pick up on is yes or no, that whatever this is, there's going to be two sides.
Excellent.
There's a debate.
Excellent.
And then we looked at the picture, and we saw that the picture was fruit. So we were like, maybe it has something to do with food.
Yep.
And the food looks like it's made with metal or like
Yep.
stitched together. So maybe it has something to do with food and
Great.
authentic or non-authentic food.
And then I like the question, how does the author illuminate a complex topic? Now, what's interesting is one of the things we're going to discuss later on in this particular article is, does this author have a point of view? And see, so this is illuminate. So illuminate infers that this is going to be an unbiased presentation about something, and then you as the reader are supposed to decide yes or no. Because it doesn't say GMOs horrible, or GMOs gift to the world's food industry. It just says GMOs, yes or no, and then it says this is a complicated issue. And I love that you looked at the fruit. And so a good first step when you're telling kids, so a good, on your bookmark, a good first step is the first time when you get a new passage that you're going to read, you're looking for, and I like something that you guys were saying, is it literature or is it nonfiction? You know, because that's a big fork in the road. And this is obviously an informational text piece. And so that's a big fork that kids have to see really fast. Is this a story, a poem, something, a drama, or is it informational text? And the minute we land on informational text, then there's an awful lot of clues here without even reading it. And so the first read is really to look at clues at the highest level. Is it literature, is it informational text? And what do the pictures, what do things about the character? If it's literature, are there pictures, or do we see a character's name that pops out of the page? Joe, something like that. Yeah, exactly. And then if it's nonfiction, these kinds of clues are usually available. So a first read is almost like a first glance. And I loved your comment about an invitation. It really is like, here's the party. This is the invitation to the party. What do you think this party is? That's a great. So a good first read for kids to understand is when I'm first going to read something I've never read before, I'm just looking at the surface. And I'm looking at, gee, is it fiction or nonfiction? And then if it's fiction, what am I looking at? Are there pictures? Are there photographs? Is there a word that keeps popping out on the page, like Joe, 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 Joe? Is there a main character that keeps, but I'm not really reading, I'm just reacting. And then if it's nonfiction, then it is, are there bold headings? Are there context clues? Are there pictures? So it's the clues. So the first thing is always around review the text. And what I love is that, do I get a sense of organization or purpose because of this? I think we do get a sense of purpose when that says the question, yes or no. So either this author's going to tell us yes or no, or she's going to leave it up to us, yes or no. But we won't know that till we read a little bit. So the second time we read, it says, a quick read to get the gist. Have students do a run-through individual reading of a passage to get a sense of it. The quick read technique can also help students identify areas of confusion or problem vocabulary. You can liken this step to scanning a store to get a sense of how it's set up, what it sells, and what you need to find and how you can find what you need. I have found for some kids, so this says, get the gist and note where you're confused or where you're misunderstanding. That's a really good tactic. But you have to teach kids. So you say to kids, I want you to read this. And where you're confused by a word or a paragraph, put some kind of an annotation. So whatever our universal code for confusions, it might be a big C. So put a C by any word or paragraph that you don't understand. My perplexity with this has been, sometimes kids put C's all over the place. So another tactic that I've used for this gist read is circle words that seem to keep coming back again. Because for less skilled readers, that begins to point an arrow to the main idea. So I'd like you to use that tactic. I want you to read this GMO essay, and I want you to circle words that keep coming back, or phrases that keep coming up over and over again. And one of the things that I show kids is, because it is the state test, I don't think you're allowed to really, you can highlight the screen, but you also have a note function there. There's like a notepad. So one of the things you can teach them is write the high frequency words on the notes on the side. So you can actually say to the kids, write the high frequency words either on a separate sheet of paper or in a note area on the page. So you get them in the habit of collecting those words someplace when they're even in that electronic context. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's collect some. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just saying, like, some of the kid-friendly language, like, also helps for them to figure it out and for it to stick. Like, gist would be feel. Get the feel of it. You know what I mean? Kind of deal.
I like that. Yes.
You know, like I'm writing tasks in performance tasks. I have what's task? Task means job, so they put job there.
I love it.
You know, scenario, situation. You know what I mean? Kind of deal. So then that way, my kids have that memorized already. The only reason because I've been drilling it into their head since like September. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now they kind of got it. And like you're saying, if they have something like this in the end of March, start of April, some of these keywords to help them know that means just the same thing.
I agree. And just to me, in other words, I always like to say some of the big ideas. What is the author trying to tell us? And so yeah, I'm not hung up on gist at all. And it is sort of an adult. I mean, it's not an everyday 7-Eleven word that you hear down at the gas station. Oh, I'm going to get the gist of the gasoline prices are now going up. You know? So read through and circle words that seem to keep coming out, high frequency words or ideas.
I think you also were assuming they're not going to circle the word you, they, and we have to teach that. We have to teach that ahead of time because some of these kids are low enough. Well, oh, here's the pronoun you.
And you know, that's an excellent. High frequency nouns and verbs that we think will lead to the meaning of the word. So thank you for that clarity because you're absolutely right. The literal version of that is I'm going to circle the word the 800 times. Yeah.
Little
Johnny tomorrow will.
Yes. Thank you for that. But you know, and that's exactly, it's like clarifying gist. It's the conversation we have to have with the kids to make that the reality. So one of the harsh realities of this tactic is it takes time. And it's exactly the way we ought to be spending time. One of the realities of sometimes in close reading right now is the wrong people are doing all the close reading. People are supposed to be reading in close reading of the kids, not the teacher. And so the problem is, as you move into real close reading, the kids do the work. It takes time. And if we were a real group of seventh grade students, we would have some students who were done 3 minutes ago and some who had just finished the second paragraph. And you are going to have to work through that as instructors, because you do have to, I'm very fortunate today, we have all these college educated people so they can get through this in a relatively quick process. But the reality is that maybe for some of your classes, you will say, let's circle the high frequency words in the first 3 paragraphs, so the first paragraph, because you want to get to, because otherwise the kids that do it all really fast get bored and they start being dinking around. And the kids who are going really slow often are just really so lost, they really don't know what they're circling. So you kind of are going to have to feel, you're going to have a feeling tone about that. But here's what you can't give up on. It's got to be them doing the reading. By the second semester, you should be reading very rarely. You might read a paragraph, but your job is no longer to read the story to 7th grade kids. Because they're not going to, research says if kids read 20 minutes by themselves every day, academic tests, they will get to grade level. Because if you think about it, how often do you really have every kid in the room sitting there reading for 20 straight minutes every day? And in schools that have done this successfully, what they've done is they've done it school-wide, it's taken a couple of years, and say on Monday it's English, on Tuesday it's science, on Wednesday it's social studies, on Thursday it's English, and on Friday it's something else. But the point is, every day somewhere they're really doing a full 20-minute read. But you can't have people do a 20-minute read until they have these skills. You can't do 20 minutes of read just because the clock is ticking and I'm sitting there. If I don't know what I'm doing, I'm wasting 20 minutes. So you have to move towards that. And so, you know, a year or two from now, when you really get good at this, then you'll say, hey, by January, I think we can do the 20-minute reading thing, because you've got to move into it. But it does take time. This is the best time you could use, though, because our frustration is kids can't read, but we get impatient that it takes a long time for them to learn to read. This is how they learn to do it. And it's a long haul at first. So at your table, make a list of 5 words that you saw as high-frequency words in this article. At the table, it's fine.
Farmers.
Plants.
Yeah, plants and genes.
Yeah, and I saw like the monster.
And I just, you know, organism. Monster in the first grade. But I didn't.
Frankenfoods, but then also.
With genetics,
You know what I mean?
So some paragraphs, it's supposed to be multiple words that went away. Like monster.
Yeah, I have to. This is the word.
Frankenstein is supposed to be. I'll have to show them a picture of
Okay, so do you all have a list of about 6 words that are kind of, you keep slapping you in the face when you go through the story. So let's start over here. Beth, what can you give us 2 of your 6 words?
I said organism and food.
Organism, food. Okay, table back here, 2 words. 2 words you want to add to that.
Engineer and genetic.
Westy, be nice.
And cross those off.
Isn't that just like the kids?
Yep.
Great, tell them my answer. How about you guys? Anything you could add?
Well, plants is in there, but we have a
Plants?
lot of the other ones.
What? Do they have organisms?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the other ones, those only like.
Okay, and anything anybody wants to add to this list?
Frankenfoods.
Frankenfood.
Farmers.
Now, isn't it amazing? So you've read this once and you've circled words that show up a lot. Do you think this list of words begins to reveal what the theme of this story is all about? Isn't that an amazing tactic? So if the first read is those text clues, those passages, if the second read is high frequency words, at least in nonfiction, it's a real treasure trove because it really kind of gets to the gold mine of what's the author really doing. My experience has been when I tell kids to circle what they don't know this early in the game, it distracts them. And that when I read, and this is my personal bias, this is the way I read, I look for what I do know In fact, what I usually do when I read is I'm rolling along and I get to a word, genetically engineered. Let's say I don't know what that means. I keep reading. And then either I figure I know what's going on and I don't need to know that, or I realize, ugh, that was critical, and I go and look it up or something. But I don't dwell on what I don't know when I read. I dwell on what I do know. And so I think that this tactic of circling what you don't know is mistimed as the second read. I think it's and we're going to do it in a minute. We're going to actually do some that we don't know. But that's really not the way people read. And what we really want to do is help kids have a schema that this is how I attack something when I read it. So this is a pretty good tactic. So now we're into two more things. So the next one is, and so it can be, we can go two ways. We can get to be question driven, or we can actually look for the main idea. So let's kind of do a main idea read and then we'll get to question driven. But there's no right answer at this point. But the point is how every read is now purpose driven. Yes?
Last time that you were here, you talked a lot about looking at those 100 words that are used over and over again. High frequency.
Oh, that's for vocabulary. That's for vocabulary, yeah.
So, according to what you're showing me now, when would that fit into this list?
Okay, so the question is, when do those high, for me, those are when this is an important question. He said, gee, Jenny, the last time you were here, you were talking to us about high frequency vocabulary words, words that are in nonfiction text over and over again by research. The way I use those is, if I have this paragraph and I'm writing the vocabulary list that I want kids to learn for this passage, I'm going to look for those words.
So you're not going to use the high frequency word necessarily.
Correct. See, the purpose of what we just did is to find the words that lead us to the main idea. So genetically engineered is not in that high frequency word list, but it's critical to this story. However, let me look really quick and see if I can find one. Engineered is probably in that list. Engineered, because when you engineer something, you can engineer a science project, you can engineer something in the world of history, you can engineer a campaign, you can so that's a high frequency word. So I might have the word engineer as not, see what we're doing right now is we're helping kids learn to control their own entry into unseen text. Separately, I want to alert kids to important vocabulary. So separately from this, I might say, for this passage, there are 5 words I'd like us to really do a Freire model on and really talk about. One is going to be engineer. One might be generations, because generations is a really interesting word. It comes from generate, and it has all kinds of meanings across.
So are you doing this at the end, after all the comprehension stuff?
I could do it either place, but I would probably do it later as opposed to earlier. Because I want kids to practice initially, how do you enter text you don't know at all? Then I want them to reflect on what, so here's a great word, create. Create is on that list. Create's a great word. And it's a powerful word. If you can read the word create, it really helps you. So I would shop for those words out of that, and then I pick 3 or 5 of those, and at some point during the 2 weeks that we're working on whatever our unit is, I would bring those forward. Or I might even say to the kids, depending on how I've done this, you know how we have that top 100 word list, guys? Were any of those words in this? So, but if you're interested in making a vocabulary list that they learn from this, I'd shop off that list into this article. I'd say, which of our words is in that article? And I'd probably put them on a word wall over here and say, these are high frequency vocabulary words. Because a word like create, you're going to see over and over and over again. A word like genetically engineered, no, but engineered, you would see a lot of different places. And the other thing is it gives you a great conversation about root words and then all the words that come out of them. Because when you get to create, you get to creation, you get to creativity, you get to uncreate, and so you get great conversations from all of that. That was a great question, by the way, thank you. So, we're going to go 2 ways. Our third read is going to be this. Because this is nonfiction, I want you to read the first and last paragraphs and underline the first sentence of every interim paragraph. and look for the main idea. So read the first paragraph and read the last paragraph. And then between that, so you read the first paragraph, then you're going to underline and read the first sentence in every paragraph. Then you're going to read the last paragraph. So you're going to read the first paragraph, then you're going to read the first sentence of all the paragraphs, and then the last paragraph. And then we're going to have a discussion at your table. What's the main idea? What's this author trying to do for us? Okay, so at your table, talk about what, by doing that, what did you figure out, what's kind of like the main idea of what this essay is all about?
The way they change food to make it.
Especially the first paragraph. Terrorizing the village, because that paragraph.
Yeah, so maybe,
Or that, yeah, a little
it's
bit.
hidden by, it's just that it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, if you go off that first paragraph.
But
But then it
sometimes
gives-
it changes over time, sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's not a good thing, but then ultimately, is it a concern for you?
Third paragraph.
How to action.
Well, even this is the genetic changes have occurred naturally, and it's saying this is not naturally without, you know what I mean, in some cases too, so. I guess all of it.
It's amazing how most nonfiction passages in these kinds of environments run really true to that. So if you really look at that, the first paragraph kind of describes a Frankenstein experiment gone awry. And then it says, then if you just read those, the next sentence, some people use the derogatory term Frankenfood to describe food products that contain ingredients that were scientifically engineered. Genetic engineering is a process to isolate a gene, blah, blah, blah. Many genetic changes have occurred over time. For generations, farmers have grafted plants, but now there are new concerns, and here are some questions. I mean, all we did was read the first. We have a pretty good idea about what's going on in this story. That's a good tactic to teach kids around nonfiction. It doesn't work for fiction, because fiction isn't structured that way. You have to start looking for storylines, and a lot of times in fiction, chronology is helpful. What happens first, what happens second, what happens third. You can have a number of events, underline events, because because it's more purpose-driven. But this is a great tactic to teach kids around nonfiction text, because it really holds true. So if our third read is main idea, it's like main, right? You tell it, that's a terrible name. It's either main idea or it's going to have to be purpose-driven if it's a literature question. You're going to have to start looking, am I supposed to be thinking about the setting? Am I supposed to be thinking about characters? So you might need a question to frame that third read. Then the fourth read, let's be question-driven. So here are some questions that we have around this article. And so if you'll answer question 1, which is one that we should do all the time, which is words in context. And the nice thing about this, and one of the reasons I like these questions, is it's going to ask you, how did you determine your response? So don't just tell me the right answer, but tell me how you got that right answer. So in question one, we're very purpose-driven. We're going to line 9 and finding the definition of a word. Oh, I sure do.
One per group or one per?
No, one per person, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
So that was, that's okay.
Sure, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. No, 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 I'm not saving any of them. I'll look over someone's shoulder, which is not a big deal. Are there any extras of the questions? Oh, yeah. Brian.
Oh, no.
Beth, I have to keep one.
Okay, I can just not.
For me? No, no, you can have this as soon as I'm done with it. I just have to follow along here.
I can.
So the hard thing for kids isn't what the right answer is, it's why. Don't answer the rest of the questions, just answer the first one, just the first one. Gosh, you guys are, you're so fun. Stop.
Just like the children.
Stop, jeez, yeah, put your pencils down. Okay, I was wondering why it was taking you all so long. Oh my God, they're doing the whole thing. No, this is the first one. Remember, we're being purpose-driven. The purpose was to only answer this question for this. Okay, so now, I think that as adults, because most of us know what skeptical meant anyway, that was pretty easy. But even for adults, this word in context thing, what is the answer? What was the sentence you write to explain why you picked it over the other 4 choices? And so often we haven't taught the students how to rationalize why they said the right answer of skeptical is C, which is, does it C or something? It's a B. It's suspicious. Okay. Yeah. I couldn't remember. So here's the tactic. So here's the tactic. Whenever you get a word in context, what's the tactic? You read the sentence the word is in, and you see if that sentence helps you get the meaning. If that fails, you read the sentence before, and you read 2 sentences. And if that fails, you read 3. And if that fails, you're in trouble. And by the way, Kate Kinsella will tell you that 85% of the words are never in context, in anything. That authors don't ever run around with this notion, oh, I've got to explain everything. And so, but here's what the good news is. Whenever in a state test they ask those questions, it's because the context is sitting there. So the clues are there. So what you have to teach the kids is to start out by saying, okay, so let's read this sentence. This term suits the deeply skeptical views of this camp who hope to frighten people away from such food. What jumped out at you as, where was the place where we could figure out what a skeptic might be?
Frightened.
Frightened.
Frightened, so it was like a synonym.
Perfect. So now we go back to the multiple choice and we say, is a frightened person, is a skeptic easy to fool? The frightened person is easy to fool, but the skeptic is not easy to fool. A skeptic is someone who is in fact concerned that others are getting fooled. See what a great distractor that is? And that's the that's actually the antonym of skeptic. And so that's very difficult. We're adults. Suspicious. A fussy eater, that's the really bad answer. You know, that's like, you were really out of it if you thought that was. And then trusting, okay. The term is hopes to frighten people away. If I trust people's own judgment, I don't try to frighten them away. That is a very sophisticated conversation we just had. So we found the answer in that sentence. But think about what would be the sentence I would write on the state test to say that. I would say something like, a skeptical person doesn't trust, anybody who tries to frighten people away is not trusting and it's not easy to fool. That would be the right answer. Something like that. Have we taught our kids how to do that? So here's a good thing, note to self. Over the next 3 months, you're going to give your kids hundreds of little articles to read, whether it's something from the anthology. Take 1 or 2 words in context like that. A week, a day, I mean, more often the better. And just have them figure out, you know, what's the answer and why. What's it? Because it's writing that why statement that's the killer. Now, we were talking one point about how do you teach vocabulary. This is not teaching vocabulary. This is teaching the skill of defining a word in context. Skeptic could never be, like we were talking here, I don't remember, skeptic is a high frequency word. But the point is, a good reader figures out what a skeptic is because of what's sitting there. So you want to teach kids words in context. So here's what I'm going to tell you. The reality is that a lot of the articles you're reading don't have that many good words in context. And I don't want you spending hours and hours and hours. So if you find some of those worksheets for 7th grade kids that are words in context, where they have a good context sentence, and then they can write the rationale, use some of those. See, what the skill you're trying to give kids here is, how do I solve the meaning of the word when I don't know it, but the author has provided me clues? Yes?
Our WordWise workbook that we all have with our anthology provides opportunities. The directions do not lead you in that direction, but it would say, like, what's the best answer to fill in the blank? And it'll give you a really nice sentence with context clues in it. And so as an extension, you can have them answer the blank.
It's the why
But
question,
then,
yeah.
how were you able to,
Yeah,
why?
it's a how, yeah, how did that, yeah.
So that's a way we could just, it's
Well,
already
you're
made
spot
for us.
on, you're spot on. My point is, you may not be able to, you can't waste your time. I will tell you, because I've tried this. I've tried to have great fidelity, and I get something out of a book I was using, and I'm spending 45 minutes to find a word in context. Well, that's a waste of your time. So because teaching people how to find a word in context is a very unique skill. And every time they see it on a state test, it will be done just like that. It'll say, look at line 6. Here's the word, tell me what it means, and tell me how you do that. That's exactly how they're going to. So, in this case, teaching a word in isolation is good. It's because what you're teaching them is the skill that they're going to apply every time they do a close read. But for you, it might be easy to just say, 3 times a week, I'll give them 2 words, they figure out the right answer, and then tell me how they logic that to be the right answer. Because what kids are bad at is actually stating, where was the clue that told me this? Yeah.
Well, I learned, I can remember this from my 5th grade teacher who taught me this. I still remember it. But it came up not so long ago, but like context clues, talking about a tactic, have a tactic on figuring out the context clue. Like read above and below the word, that's vague. So it's either going to be defined, it's either going to be a synonym, or it's going to be an antonym, comparing and contrasting.
Yeah.
So that's what there's a tactic to find it.
Absolutely.
And then usually sometimes it doesn't mean it's going to be perfectly like direct, but it kind of gives them something to go on. They exhaust those 3, then maybe they might still need a dictionary.
Because you're
Especially if it's a
right.
multiple meaning word.
Yeah, because the first one is, it says skeptic, comma, somebody who trusts no one, comma, or home free.
Mhm.
And the next one says skeptic, comma, suspicious person. And then the next one says, skeptic, but I think what we have to practice is this one, where it's a little more buried in there. It's not as explicit as that.
Yeah.
That's the ones you have to practice, the ones where the definition isn't sitting right behind the word.
Do you recommend practicing it with it being multiple choice?
Okay, here's what I'm gonna tell you. I do not recall, because I would look at some of the release test items that you guys have access to. How does the state ask them about words in context? How does the state ask them about an unknown word? Because that's what I want to teach them. Okay,
Yeah.
let's be honest here. In the rest of your life, last week, did somebody come up to you and say, gee, what is the meaning of this word, sensational, on this box of cheer? And it's in the context of a box of cheer. What's the meaning? No. This is a test-taking device. This is a way that academic missions measure how well kids read. So I, with a clear conscience, go, this is, a lot of things we do in close reading are all about college and career. That you do have to learn to read things multiple times. You do have to learn to read with purpose. But when you talk about words in context, that's a skill that you want to internalize so you use it. But in the real world, it's rarely multiple choice.
Yeah.
Box of cheer, A, B, C. But the reality is I would do exactly whatever the state does.
Well,
And
and in
most of
reality, the word-wise is the old CST, so it gives you stuff to practice, but it's not rigorous enough.
Yeah, and does it have the Y part after it?
I just made up the Y, just so it's
Yeah.
more rigor, but it's
Well,
not
this,
very.
look at this,
intense.
look at this. That's why I tell you, these are not easy for you as teachers. This whole essay is really sophisticated.
Oh, yeah.
This is not, a little grammar school essay. This is a tough essay. And when you look at this term suits the deeply skeptical viewers of this camp who hope to frighten, that's a really well-crafted sentence. And so finding them, so one of the things we should all do is collect good sentences like that and share them, because it is, what we're trying to teach kids is the skill of finding the meaning by looking somewhere else in the sentence. That's what we're trying to teach. Thoughts?
We should also, don't you think, sort of say that.
Oh, absolutely, over and over and over and over again.
This is something that you're going to be asked in the test, and so that's why we're going to practice doing it. It's not necessarily something that's ever going to happen if you're...
Well, the reality is life is not a multiple choice test.
Right.
And so that's the silliness. The reality is I run into words I don't know all the time.
Right.
And I have a variety of ways as an adult. I go to the internet and see what it means. In fact, one of the things I brought to use today that we won't have time for had a word, can't remember, I'll have to look it up again. Anyway, it was a British sausage. None of us would have known this word. There was no word in context. I knew it was food, that's all I knew, it was food. But it was like, oh, okay. So you're right, in the real world, when I run into a word I don't know, I knew it was food, didn't know what kind of food it was, and went to the internet and Googled the word, and here it said, this is the word. So, but the reality is we stumble into words we don't know all the time in life. The key is we have to have coping skills. The reality is when you're a student and you want to get a job, get placed for a scholarship, take the SAT test to go to college, the world asks you multiple choice questions about that. And that's one way that we measure good reading. And that's what you ought to tell them. That's the honest truth.
Right.
I think that was a good connection to make with the assessment that, like she said, on the assessment, it will point out in paragraph 2 the word blah, blah, blah. If it's a word on the task that's just strictly for context that they don't want to spend a lot of time in, they give it to the kids. The kids can hover over the word and the meaning comes up.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know it's impossible for us to teach every word they could possibly come across, but some of that, if it's just very difficult, in the context of
And what I like to tell, I don't ever like to say, the reason this is important is because it's on the test.
Sure.
What I like to tell them is, this is important because this is what good readers do.
Yeah.
But the way that reading is measured, this is how it gets measured. So I want you to do it because the skill is what good readers do. This is how it's assessed on the test. You had some thoughts.
Yeah, all of this, the importance of it would be in our learning intentions. So that's what
Absolutely,
we're
yes.
So that's where, like Mark was saying, make sure that they know why we're doing it. That would be definitely part of the learning.
It would be so good to say in your learning intention, learning words in context is a really important skill to become an excellent reader. When you do this in certain testing environments, it will be a multiple choice question. And we're going to learn to master that. But the real skill sitting behind that is just, as I read along, I'm going to run into words I don't know.
And I'm going to give you a specific skill to practice today, but that's not necessarily going to work in every single.
No, and I love what you, I mean, because it could be a synonym, it could be a definition, it could be an example. Those are all ways that people get, and then it could be these more subtle sentences that are like, ooh, that's pretty good sentence.
Well, you know, talking about purpose of reading, if you want to really get the kids to be engaged and locked in, just tell them everything that they do eventually will be around the test that you have to read on. Driver's license, all that kind of stuff.
And I think that's the
you know,
key.
then the brick hits them on the forehead.
Well, I think that's really important, is that I think there are two tests in life. One is absolutely, there's gateway. There are gatekeeper tests. Driver's license, SAT, getting into, if you're in the military and you want to get to a better rank or you want to get to a specific school, you're going to take a test. But the other thing is, in life, when your boss says, go do this, all of you have had this experience. So Teresa says, go do this. And you're doing it, and it requires reading, you run into words you don't know. You just got to figure it out, because that's what reading really is in the real world. Yeah.
Sorry, I keep going.
That's okay.
The way
It's an
that
important
the tests,
conversation.
Ask these questions a lot of times is they'll say, like, consider the following sentence, and then give that sentence, and then they'll say, like, which word or phrase could replace skeptical without changing the meaning of the sentence.
Great.
And then they'll give you 4.
Well, see, and what I am a little rusty. I have not stayed as close to those contexts as you guys have. And I think for you, over the next 3 months, to embed those different formats into these little mini quizzes that you just give in 3 minutes. You don't have 45, you don't have big data talks around them. You, every day, every other day, you give a couple, you say how they do it. And it goes like this. 2 right, 1 right, none right. 2 right, 1 right, none right. Oh, gee, 80% of the kids got 2 right. I am good. 80% of the kids got none right. Oop, I'm in trouble. Or they got this one, but not that one. It's like sorting a deck of cards. Because all you want to know is, are they getting it? And if they're not getting it, can I go back tomorrow and say, hey, yesterday the score was 10 got them all, 5 got this, 5 got that, 5 got this. Help me. What was hard for you about that? Let's talk through why was that hard. We're going to practice it again tomorrow. And I am trying to be a better teacher so you learn this, because this is not easy to do. And that's, to me, what short cycle assessment is. It's nothing to do with the district or, the central office. It's about what do I do every day to see what the kids are really holding on to and what I have to redo over and over again to help them be successful. Kind of push us forward a little bit. So now, what's the second question that some of you asked? Okay, the second question. What is the writer's goal in the opening paragraph? So I think many of you, so read the opening paragraph and at your table talk about what is the writer's goal? Why did the writer write the opening paragraph?
Experiments can go bad.
And they use it common. I use it amplifying, but like, you know what I mean?
Use something that's common that everything's
Common.
Store. Yeah, exactly.
Anymore, but
Just
about what this is gonna be.
Yeah.
when you phrase it,
I
so
know.
that when you start that way, you go,
It's a good example.
Before you can start reading.
No, it does start out, I mean,
You totally think that
there's
there's
basically that they.
Because I would say that you start
Yeah.
with disaster, like, phrase the word and you just
So is
start
this.
it.
What happened here?
But when you're like,
Using the
you
word
know,
launch.
about scientists,
Like, what are you talking about?
life, you just kind of a hook, right?
So in the last group, we had a conversation about whether kids would even know who Frankenstein was.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, well, I thought they would. Others thought they wouldn't.
Even if they don't know it.
But there's enough detail in that first paragraph that they sort of tell you what it is.
But just kind of.
So-
But this is like.
So what's our takeaway? Our takeaway here is, as you are going through all kinds of different paragraphs in this spring, think about paragraphs like this one, that were hooks. This is a hook to catch the reader and connect prior knowledge. So that the reason the author put that in is A, to hook the reader, because it's an interesting way to approach a topic. And then B, it's because it's about science gone bad. And this is an article about science gone bad. And so he wants us to kind of have that context of science isn't always right. So be mindful of those paragraphs that are in things you're reading where the author does this, because you want to ask kids, why did the author do this? So when you think about what passages do I want to pick for a close read, I want to pick a passage that might have one of these hooks in it. Because when they ask why did the author do it, it's usually because it's a hook. And, otherwise because a GMO is a genetically engineered, GMOs can be good, they can be bad. No, I mean, this is a very good writer. So a good writer has a hook, and it has something that sets sort of the atmosphere. And so, but we have to have kids practice that, see that, and then be able to write that kind of an answer. So one of the things I hope is a takeaway for you, are these are lots of good questions. All these questions are based on the 7th and 8th grade Common Core questions, core standards. So all these questions you can use on any of the passages you're reading. So let's look at question 3. Explain how the picture reflects views about genetically modified food. So in the interest of time, we're going to chat about that. So chat at your table real quick about the picture. What is the picture sort of, is there a message in that picture? What's the message?
Basically helps together, stitched and
So what I heard is, pears don't have rivets, it's unnatural. And so it's a piece of food that somebody has tinkered with. And either it's a piece of art, it's about some kind of a riveter who does art, or in this case, it's a piece of food that is now being patchworked together. So, state the main concern opponents raise about genetically modified foods. What paragraph would those be?
Second to the last.
Yeah, the 6th paragraph says the new concerns. The old concern is up in that skeptics paragraph, and then the new concerns are down in that other paragraph. But I heard some of you were already, I could hear some of you were saying you were right now working on persuasive writing. And so this is a really good question, So what were the main concerns? What were the main, what was the evidence that somebody gave that this was a good idea? What was the evidence that someone gave that was a bad idea? What research did they use? What examples did they use? So this gets to the meat of the state standard. This question 5. What's unusual about the closing paragraph?
Question.
3 questions. Why do we think the author would end his essay with questions?
Leave it up to you.
Further
Yeah.
research.
So I think, and so really what's interesting is we kind of get a sense that he is alarmed by this GMO, but he really isn't at the end saying GMOs should be abandoned, these are bad for human beings. He's saying, I'm concerned, I want you to be concerned, I want you to be aware, and I want you to go out and make your decisions. So that's a really good notion about what is the purpose of that last paragraph. And then so look at the last question says, what does this essay indicate? What clues in this essay indicate that it was written to inform rather than persuade? So the ending in questions is one clue.
Well, I think we naturally think just because the title says yes or no, it's automatically a persuasive read. But in this case, it's informative.
It truly was saying yes or no.
Yeah.
So the title is a clue, the closing paragraph is a clue. Does he ever, or she, does the author ever take a position as they give examples of things gone well or things not gone well? They're pretty balanced. They tell us about lemons, then they tell us about things that aren't going well. So they really don't.
World hunger being okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty unbiased, which is hard to find.
It's because he's had that Fresno State corn and you can't get rid of that stuff.
That's exactly
That's
right.
why it's so good with GMO.
So we are like 7 minutes
So good.
from being done. And there's a couple things I got this stuff today from this book. And if you like this, and this is helpful, this is a book that is it's for 7th and 8th grade, and it's aligned to the Common Core. And it starts out explaining, it reviews the key elements of the Common Core in reading. And it has a rubric. Then for every passage, it talks about the focus, the teaching tips, and it shows you which standards it's aligned to. And what I liked about it is it had these really good open-ended questions that are aligned to your standards. So if you would like a copy of this, raise your hand. Very good. So the district hired my group at Fresno State to do this BCI. I read that we're working with you. So there's a little money in there, so I'm going to buy this for each of you. So you can decide. Now, for this year, the 7th and the 8th grade are going to have the same book. So next year, you guys don't care. Next year, the 8th grade will have to figure out which things you already showed them. But I don't think most junior high kids remember what they read last year.
Well,
Anyway.
and guys, if you're doing a seminar class, that might be something that really, for second semester, because our ACT workbooks are probably getting towards the end, and so that may be something.
Well, this is, what I really like about this is they're really rigorous articles. So I made for you what I was doing. So what I did is I was interested in food as a theme coming off the holidays, because God knows that was my theme of my holiday. So I took the models of questions that were in this and made some examples of how you might then take those questions and use them in another context. So this is a nonfiction article about vegetarians, and those are the questions of the article. And I just got this off the internet. So I'm not saying this is the best article in the world. And I got it because what I did is I Googled this article and I found out where it came from, and I got this other article from the same source.
I think you need to.
I was just gonna get one.
Sure, there you go.
Just having a copy without you, right?
Yes, yeah. Okay, so, in fact, I'm gonna give you the book that it's not too, but I give it to you right
Oh,
now,
okay,
yes.
no problem.
Okay, so then, the second one I did is I thought, I've got to do something in literature. So the only thing I knew about literature and food was Oliver Twist. So I took the song from Oliver Twist about food and treated it like a poem. And that's where that funny word was. I'll have to figure out what that word was. The word was Savoloys, Savoloys, S-A-V-E-L-O-Y-S. Those are sausages.
We need a few more here.
Questions or answers?
Questions.
Three questions.
Okay, sausage.
And one article.
No, sausage.
Did everybody here get everything they need? For the questions, here's the questions, here's question one.
Yeah, you get that sausage right up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That should be enough for Reagan.
You brought it up. I would feel that Scott used to get roll with it.
So my goal today was to help you think more about close reading as something that's centered around the kids and not you as the teachers. That we have to shift who's doing the close reading, because if you notice, I almost did no close reading today. You did. That's what you have to have. See, in the second semester, you got to quit being the one that's reading and explaining it all. You've got to put it on them, and then you have to have them talking partners, figure it out, because you got to persevere. And our kids are so good at whining. Do you know American children are the best whiners in the world? There was a research done, this was about a decade ago, that said American children can get anything they want if they whine 7 times. That the average successful whine required 7 whines. Oh, please, please. And so we have kids that are trained to whine as opposed to do the work. And you guys, I think there's 2 things I'd like to leave you. The things we did today were rigorous passages. That's what they're supposed to be for the kids. Don't bail the kids out. Don't say our kids don't know who Frankenstein is. Then they better darn well learn how to figure it out from reading. And that's what the expectation is on the upcoming test.